with the daily routine. Presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motions. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in this, the 250th anniversary of representative government in Nova Scotia, we celebrate our democratic heritage and all those who uphold these cherished traditions. And whereas one individual is the member for the beautiful Colchester-Muscatawbit Valley, who takes his responsibilities as an elected representative very seriously. And whereas his colleague and friend is celebrating his own special anniversary, having served in this legislature for 15 years after his victory in a by-election on November 2nd, 1993. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate our colleague on his many years of enthusiastic and dedicated service to his community, province, and to the institution of public service. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The Honourable the Minister for the Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Advisory Council on the Status of Women held the 4th Nova Scotia Campaign School for Women from October 24th to 26th at Mount St. Vincent University. And whereas
Order,
the Commonwealth
please.
Women...
The Honourable the Minister for the Status of Women has the floor.
And whereas the Commonwealth women parliamentarians from across Canada attended the school and participated as critics and experts, and joined 25 participants in this unique and lauded political learning. And whereas the government recognizes that more women need to be elected to office and supports the efforts of the Advisory Council to increase the numbers and diversity of women in political life to build a more inclusive democracy. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House salute the Commonwealth women parliamentarians and congratulate the graduates of the campaign school as tomorrow's Women in the Lead. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Foster Family Appreciation Week was celebrated the week of October 19th to the 25th, when we recognized the contributions of foster families across Canada and throughout Nova Scotia. And whereas foster family volunteers are dedicated caring individuals in roles that directly support children in need of care in Nova Scotia. Whereas the Nova Scotia Council for the Family Award of Merit recognizes the special efforts of board members who have provided outstanding contributions to their member organizations. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House...
There's a lot of chatter and it's hard to hear the member, hard to believe. The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Speechless, Speaker, yet again. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the contribution and dedication that Ethel Wenzel and Bernie Proctor have provided to our community's children who are in need of foster care by serving as board members for the Federation of Foster Families. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Board of Directors, members and staff of Clean Nova Scotia have been working for 20 years to inspire environmental change throughout the Halifax Regional Municipality, and whereas their hard work during Waste Reduction Week has helped create awareness of the importance of reducing, reusing and recycling, and whereas the programs and educational tools they offer are making a difference towards sustainable prosperity in this province, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House join the people of Nova Scotia in congratulating Clean Nova Scotia for 20 years of service towards a healthy environment in Nova Scotia. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas throughout the year, the volunteer firefighters in our province generously give up their personal time to fight fires in our rural communities. And whereas on June the 13th of this year, in particular, we saw an example of how forest fires impact communities such as Porters Lake, Lake Echo, and Tantallon. And whereas these volunteer firefighters go above and beyond the call of duty to protect the citizens of this province, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House thank these men and women for continuously giving of their time and risking their lives to save people, property, and wildlife in our province. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia has a worldwide reputation as the Canadian education province because of its home to 11 well-respected universities and colleges, and whereas the Times of London publishes each year a ranking of the 200 best universities in the world based on a wide range of criteria, including a survey of their academic peers, and whereas for the first time since the rankings began, Dalhousie University was ranked in the top 200, acknowledging the excellent teaching and research being done at Atlantic Canada's largest university. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House congratulate the administration, professors, staff, and students at Dalhousie University for being named one of the 200 best universities in the world. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas construction has recently begun on the new Access Centre in Sackville to service that community and surrounding areas. And whereas it was the MLA of Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville who first pushed this idea.
Order, please. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Is it your wish, Speaker, that I
Start
begin?
again, please.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas construction has recently begun on the new Access Centre in Sackville to service that community and surrounding areas. Whereas it was the local MLA of Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville who first pushed this idea while he held the portfolio of Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations. And whereas the Sackville Drive Business Association has recently recognized the Minister in their newsletter for all his efforts in making sure that this project came to fruition, therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House join me in congratulating the people of Sackville and surrounding communities on their success in securing a new access centre that will be a tremendous addition to their communities. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister for Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas October is Women's History Month and it recognizes and celebrates the achievements and contributions of women of all ages to our provinces and to our nation's history. And whereas the Advisory Council on the Status of Women is honoring women in the lead during October and November through presentations on women's elected representation by holding the Nova Scotia Campaign School for Women, through support for Muriel Ducksworth's 100th birthday concert, and through the film series Women in the Lead. Whereas the successes of the Advisory Council are due to the efforts of hundreds of dedicated individuals in all their diversity and partnerships with women's organizations and all levels of government. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House recognize women leaders of the past, present, and future who make a difference in the communities across Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the students and staff at Shannon Park Elementary School are working together to help create a clean and green Nova Scotia, and whereas members of the Shannon Park Green Team are teaching their peers about the importance of environmental stewardship, and whereas their efforts are going a long way in helping us meet our environmental goals while creating a bright future for the next generation of Nova Scotians. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join the people of Nova Scotia in congratulating all the staff and students who participate in the Green Team at Shannon Park Elementary School for recognizing the important role they play in environmental management of this province. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. I'm not sure if it's because today is Halloween or what, but there seems to be an excessive amount of chatter in the chamber today, and it is very hard to hear people as they are doing their job. So I would ask everybody to please pay respect to the individual speakers as they are on their feet. Thank you. Introduction of bills. Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 36 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Beneficiaries Designation Act.
The Honourable Member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 36 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Beneficiaries Designation Act.
Bill number 196, an act to amend Chapter 36 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Beneficiaries Designation Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 380 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Utilities Act.
The Honourable Member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 380 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Utilities Act.
Bill number 197, an act to amend Chapter 380 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Utilities Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Increase Youth Civic Participation in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Increase Youth Civic Participation in Nova Scotia.
Bill 198, an act to increase youth civic participations in Nova Scotia.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 40 of the Acts of 2005, the Enforcement of Court Orders Act.
The Honourable Member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 40 of the Acts of 2005, the Enforcement of Court Orders Act.
Bill 199, an act to amend Chapter 40 of the Acts of 2005, the Enforcement of Court Orders Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 214 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Human Rights Act.
The Honourable Member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 214 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Human Rights Act.
Bill number 200, an act to amend Chapter 214 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Human Rights Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future date. Notices of motion. The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Muriel Duckworth is widely respected as a trailblazer who played a major role in the fight against poverty and injustice here at home and abroad. And whereas one of the founding members of the National Voice of Women and as a member of the Board of Directors with Oxfam Canada, Muriel Duckworth fought for the rights of children and women and worked to promote peace and bring about the necessary change to help impoverished communities become sustainable. And whereas Muriel Duckworth celebrates her 100th birthday today, Friday, October 31st, and on November 2nd, Oxfam Canada will host an historical musical tribute at the Rebecca Cohen Auditorium to launch the Jack and Muriel Duckworth Fund for Active Global Citizenship. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly extend our congratulations to Muriel Duckworth on her 100th birthday and commend Oxfam Canada for organizing a star-studded musical tribute to this great fighter and leader for human rights and peace in Canada and overseas. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas last night this legislature held an emergency debate on the economic crisis looming in this province. And whereas in true form the Premier and his deputy presented their 15 minutes of fiction, trying to make it seem as though they have been preparing for this economic downturn for years. And whereas this is another example that the Premier would rather provide media spin than actually deal with the economic issues that really matter. Therefore, be it resolved that the Premier put aside the rhetoric and commit to developing a real action plan for getting our economy back on track. I would ask.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled.
It was close, Manny.
The Honourable the Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Canada's blood reserves have hit what is being described this week as an all-time low, and whereas Canadian Blood Services reported this week that being below 10,000 units is dangerously low for a country as big as Canada, as seriously injured car crash victims can require up to 50 units. And whereas to complicate the issue, Canada has a dedicated core of donors who are maxed out. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly encourage Nova Scotians far and wide to make an effort to donate blood, beginning today, as well as at the Fort Edward Armory in Windsor on November 10th, between 1 and 3 and 5 and 8 p.m. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Air Canada is proceeding to close its flight attendant base in Nova Scotia, taking hundreds of jobs from the province and making air travel to and from Nova Scotia more vulnerable to disruption. And whereas federal legislation safeguarding the major bases of operation of Air Canada, which was built by decades of public investment, provided no protection for the important base of operations in the Halifax area. And whereas the province of Manitoba has taken legal action to protect its flight attendant base using that important law. Therefore, be it resolved that this House urges the federal minister responsible for the Atlantic Gateway to bring forward legislation protecting Air Canada's base of operations in Nova Scotia, including its flight attendant base, and urges vigorous action by the Premier to keep the flight attendant jobs in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The Honourable the Member for Halifax-Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas it is common
Order,
knowledge...
please.
Try that again. Whereas it is common knowledge that it takes a Liberal government to clean up a fiscal mess, and whereas this was the case... can't.
Order, please. The Honourable the Member for Halifax-Clayton Park has the floor.
Whereas
Order.
this was the case... Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The Honourable the Member for Halifax-Clayton Park will try this one more time and start from the beginning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Whereas it is common knowledge that it takes a Liberal government to clean up a fiscal mess, and whereas this was the case in the early 1990s, with Liberal governments restoring fiscal prudence following the big spending governments of John Buchanan and Brian Mulroney, and whereas the Minister...
Order, please.
And whereas the Minister of Economic Development echoed these claims yesterday in the House by recognizing that it was Liberal governments that made today's balanced budgets possible. Therefore, be it resolved that the Premier follow the lead of his minister and recognize that it was a Liberal government that put this province back on track following a decade of undisciplined spending by John Buchanan. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I have heard several noes. The motion is tabled. The Honourable the Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas an organic farm in Victoria County was the winner of the Spirit Nova Scotia Local Food Award, and whereas Jeremy Frith and Sue Brown of Mountain Meadow Farm won in the producer category, and whereas the farm produces more than 50 types of vegetables in addition to herbs and flowers, many of which are grown at the request of local award-winning hotels and restaurants in the area, and the bulk of the produce sold at the market in Coxheath, and farm gate sales have been steadily increasing. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send congratulations and best wishes for the future to Jeremy Frith and Sue Brown of Mountain Meadow Farm for their contribution to the well-being of Cape Bretoners and those fortunate enough to visit the island. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice, and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Janine Stewart of Marshville, Pictou County is spearheading a project to knit or crochet Afghan blankets to send to people in war-torn Afghanistan this winter, and whereas Janine is supporting the work of Afghans for Afghans, a non-profit organization that sends hand-knit and crocheted blankets, hats, mittens, socks, sweaters, and vests to the people of Afghanistan, and whereas Janine is hosting a weekly knitting bee and encouraging people at home to make 6-inch squares to be stitched into Afghan blankets. Therefore, be resolved that this Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Janine Stewart for her work with Afghans for Afghans and commends her for humanitarian efforts to help others in our world. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Gulf of Maine Visionary Award recognizes innovation, creativity, and the commitment to protecting the marine environment, And whereas the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities has been named one of these year's recipients, and whereas the UNSM has been given this award in recognition of the development of a municipal sustainability office that advises communities on a number of environmental matters. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities on winning the Gulf of Maine Visionary Award and commend them on their commitment to a more sustainable Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas long-serving Pictou County paramedic Bill Muirhead was recently honoured for his work, whereas Lieutenant Governor Mayanne Francis presented Mr. Muirhead with the Emergency Services Medal earlier this year, and whereas the award is designed to recognize the paramedics who have served 20 years in the line of duty and who have gone above and beyond what is expected. Mr. Muirhead has been helping those in emergency situations for more than 28 years, and was humbled by the honour, being one of the 3 recipients this year and the first one from Pictou County. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send congratulations and their appreciation to paramedic Bill Muirhead for being recognized by his peers for such important work in his community. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia has a long and distinguished history of competitive rowing, and the Nova Scotia Rowing Association is now a steward of this tradition, aiming to continue it with even more distinction, and whereas Sean Leyland, Level 4 certified coach who has spent the last 3 years of his 9 years' experience in Australia, has now been hired as Nova Scotia provincial rowing coach, and whereas Sean has coached medal-winning crews throughout Canada, Australia, and at the World Championships. Therefore, be it resolved that this House welcome Sean Leyland to the Nova Scotia rowing community, wish the Nova Scotia Rowing Association all success in continuing the province's fine tradition of competitive rowing on the world stage. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas over the past year, this government has pushed its Select Nova Scotia program as a knight in shining armour for the agriculture sector, and whereas while it is important, very important, that Nova Scotians buy locally produced food, it is crucial that government not forget the local food producers. And whereas the most recent GPI Atlantic report states that fewer people are entering the agricultural industry, and those who are in are losing money at a frantic pace, with the average debt at $700,000, therefore be it resolved the Minister of Agriculture take a serious look at this grave report and develop a strategy to turn the agricultural sector around. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear a no. The motion is tabled. The Honourable the Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the village of Bedeck proudly erected bronze statues of 2 of its most important citizens, and whereas the village unveiled statues of Alexander Graham Bell and his wife Mabel during Canada Day celebrations this year, and whereas the work was a gift for Bell Alliant and Bell Canada and was created by Halifax sculptor Peter Buston, and the new statue of the famous inventor and his wife overlooks the family home, Ben Bria. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the village of Bedeck, Bell Alliant, and Bell Canada for coming together to honour 2 of history's most important figures and the Cape Breton connection. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Calouse Festival, an annual fair held by the Lakeview, Windsor Junction, Fall River communities, has celebrated citizenship, community, and heritage for over 35 years, and whereas Calouse, which means celebration by the lake in Mi'kmaq, attracts thousands of residents and visitors each year with its spectacular fireworks display, and whereas dedicated volunteers on the Calouse Festival Committee have worked diligently for the communities for over 35 years. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly commend the Calouse Festival Committee for its important contributions to the Calouse Festival in the communities of Lakeview, Windsor Junction, and Fall River. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the municipality of the District of Lunenburg is the largest rural municipality in terms of total property assessment in the province of Nova Scotia, and whereas in October of this year the municipality of the District of Lunenburg saw 25 people put their names forth in the municipal elections, and whereas the new council, consisting of mayor and 12 councillors, will represent the best interests of the residents of the municipality of the District of Lunenburg for the next 4 years. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate Mayor Don Down and councillors Basil Oikel, Don Swicker, Frank Fossen, Milton Countaway, Sandra Staton, Wade Carver, Kathy Moore, John Vino, Arthur Young, Lee Noss, Martin Bell, and Eric Hustovic on their election to the municipality of the District of Lunenburg Municipal Council. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas since 1993, Trenton resident Archie Contock has been collecting millions of pop can tabs, and whereas Contock collects the tabs from all over, which he then exchanges for cash at the local bottle exchange, whereas the money goes towards purchasing wheelchairs for kids, and Contock has so far been able to buy 12 and is now working at number 13. This year, grade 3 class in the Calgary area school also collected tabs for Contock and dubbed him the Pop Can Tab Hero. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the stellar community work of Trenton's Archie Contock and his 15-year commitment to special children in need and for bringing Nova Scotia values to other parts of Canada. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mark Kays is an avid supporter of football for both the Timberley Titans and the Sir John A. Macdonald Flames, and whereas this football father uses photographic skills to promote football in our community, and whereas Mark Kays' volunteer dedication to football is exemplary, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates Mark Kays for his commitment to the Timberley Titans and Sir John A. Macdonald High School Football Flames programs. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Carmelita Cousins has worked with the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board for the past 25 years and is now the facilitator of library support for the board, and whereas at a recent conference in Vancouver she was presented with the Canadian Library Association's Library Technicians Interest Group Award for outstanding contributions to the library community at the regional, provincial, and national level, And whereas this is the highest national award for a person in her field, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating Carmelita on her well-deserved award, as well as her continued success with her career pursuits. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Shelburne.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Clarks Harbour Lady Foggies won the Shelburne County Minor Ball Association Squirt Girls League Championship on August the 16th, 2008. And whereas the Clarks Harbour Ladies Foggies won over the Shelburne Bashers 5-4 in the championship game. And whereas the most valuable player of the championship game was Brianna Swim. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate the Clarks Harbour Ladies Foggies for winning the Shelburne County Minor Ball Association Squirt Girls League Championship on August the 16th, 2008. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed?
Agreed.
All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the third annual Kentville Mazda Golf Players Championship is in the books for another year, and whereas event organisers Kyle Selig and Mike Landry and sponsor Kentville Mazda traditionally invite 30 of the best golfers to Berwick Heights, where some outstanding golf is played, an exception this year being the tournament was held to only 18 holes because of inclement weather. And whereas despite the shortened tournament, Chris Evans of Ashburn won the tournament with a score of 74. Therefore be resolved this House applaud the diligence and hard work exercised by Mike Landry of Kentville Mazda in hosting the third annual Kentville Mazda Players Championship. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 2008, the Pictou County United Way Bikes for Kids program and Pictou County Cycle have repaired and delivered 81 bicycles to children in the community. And whereas Pictou County Cycle, its owner Clint Snell, and many volunteers have spent hundreds of hours fixing and repairing 399 bicycles since this community program began in 2003. And whereas Pictou County Cycle has carried on its volunteerism into developing its own race team and continues to provide a high level of commitment to the Pictou County community. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly commend Clint Snell, his staff, and the Pictou County United Way for the hundreds of hours they have spent on a program which results in healthier, happier, and more active children in our community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Rick Hilliard is the Village of Bible Hills 2008 representative volunteer. Whereas Rick Hilliard has been involved with scouting and beavers for the last 17 years, has participated in 3 national jamborees as a scout leader, was the food service coordinator for the Beaver Cub Provincial Camp. And whereas Rick Hilliard sat on the Bible Hill Parks and Recreation Committee, has been a chaperone for teens dances over the years, and has been an active member, treasurer, and past and president of the Golden Age Auto Club, which raises money through their annual show and shine event. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Rick Hilliard on being named Bible Hills Volunteer of the Year and thank him for his many community contributions over many years. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Susan Levy, after the loss of her husband, was suddenly faced with grieving and having to learn to live alone. And whereas Susan Levy was instrumental in setting up a new chapter of Widowed in Self-Help Wish in Queens to support widows and widowers going through the grieving process after the loss of a loved one. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize the importance of having support groups such as WISH in all of our communities, and thank Susan Levy for seeing that need for herself and so many in our communities. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 9-year-old hockey fan and player Cam McLeod from DeBert, who hopes one day to become a professional hockey player, recently had a dream come true, and whereas Cam was the contest winner of the Breakfast Television NHL Ultimate Fan Package, which includes tickets to the National Hockey League exhibition game between Montreal and Boston here in Halifax, whereas Cam dropped the puck, got to sit behind the Boston Bruins bench, filled water bottles, was honorary stick boy, got high fives from the team members, and even drove the Zamboni. And whereas the highlight of the prize was meeting the players and bringing home a Boston Bruins jersey, which he proudly wore to school the next day. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House congratulate Cam McLeod on his dream prize, and experience this aspiring young hockey player will remember forever. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Bridgewater Elementary School student Bradley Mader aced the grade 6 Pythagoras math competition by answering all 50 questions correctly. And whereas this test is taken by 20,000 students across Canada. And whereas Bradley also won a gold medal at the South Shore Regional School Board Science Fair and won first place in mental math at the last 3 knowledge festivals held at Parkview Education Centre. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House congratulate Bradley Mader on this amazing math achievement and wish him well in his future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Yarmouth resident Winnie Surratt is a member of many community volunteer organizations and boards, including the Tri-County Regional School Board, Safe Grad Program, Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation, Special Olympics, Western Regional Library Board, and many others. Whereas in 2000, Ms. Surratt received the Governor General's Award for her volunteer work and the Yarmouth Lions Citizen of the Year Award in 0304, but still continues to excel in her efforts to support and provide the needs of others, and yearly participates in the Run for Cure events in Yarmouth and Halifax. And whereas Winnie, a 42-year employee of the CIBC, this year participated in the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation Atlantic Region's inaugural Over 50 event. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House thank Winnie Surratt for her efforts on behalf of others and congratulate her on her success. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, if I could make a quick introduction, please.
Please do.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, with us this morning is a friend from Halifax Regional Municipality, former colleague, Director of Legal Services, here this morning to listen to the upcoming debate on Bill 179, the HRM Charter. introduce Mary Ellen Donovan, Director of Legal Services for the Halifax Regional Municipality. Mary Ellen, if you'd rise and receive a warm welcome from the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Chantal Boudreau, resident of Bedford, was the recipient of the Duke of Edinburgh Award. And whereas the Duke of Edinburgh Award sets lofty goals for the participant to meet in the fields of community service, life, skill development, physical recreation, whereas Chantal has met and exceeded those expectations and has been a positive role model in her community, school, and with her peers through her involvement in this program. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House extend their congratulations to Chantal on this achievement. Mr. Speaker, I'd request a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Please call Bill number 179, Halifax Regional Municipality Charter.
Bill 179. The Honourable, the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise this morning to begin debate on second reading of Bill 179, the Halifax Regional Municipal Charter. Members will remember when I introduced the bill during the spring session of the legislature that I informed them that this charter legislation had been specifically requested by HRM.
The Honourable, the Member for Halifax-Chebucto on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I understood the Minister to have commenced speech on second reading, which he characterized as the start of second reading on this bill. My recollection is that he spoke for an hour on second reading on this bill on the 27th of May.
I want to take a 5-minute break so I can review what's going on, please. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto's point of order. In fact, he would be correct on that. However, Mr. Speaker, however, it was just an error with regards to the order paper. The order paper had shown that there was no adjournment of debate from the previous time. However, the clerk's records show that there had been an adjournment of debate. So based upon that, it was just an error. So what we will do, Mr. Speaker, obviously we go and the government will continue to elaborate on our position when the opportunity is afforded shortly.
The Honourable the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you as well to my colleague in caucus, the member from Chebucto, for making that note, being as attentive as he often shows here in the legislature. And thank you, Mr. Speaker, for addressing it.
Always is.
Always, yes. The charter regarding HRM, I appreciate that the Honourable Minister has brought this bill before the House again, 179, an act respecting Halifax Regional Municipality. This bill is significantly important to the municipality, to all the residents in this area, to Nova Scotia, of course. It's a bill that there's so many good reasons for it to get through. The municipality has laid out often on many years of this, and no doubt my colleagues in the House who have spent some time on council, certainly my recent experience on council, discussed, supported the need for this type of change. This charter was evident in so many cases, so many situations. The challenges that the municipality of Halifax region face are significant, and they're growing. The population growth is creating extreme challenges. Every day, the sustaining commercial and residential development, as we all know, has its challenges, but this Halifax Regional Municipality is doing a good job. They're doing a fine job taking care of the needs and the scope which they've been mandated, but they're asking for an extra bit of help in this charter. What clearly has been demonstrated in recent weeks, days, is the need to clarify powers of HRM, need to clarify jurisdictions, as some members of this government would do well to acknowledge and pay close attention in this regard. To improve municipal government is critical to Nova Scotians, critical to residents of HRM. Governance by improving efficiency, and I think that's what this is all about, Mr. Speaker. Improving the efficiency of the ability for the municipality to take care of the jurisdictions that they are mandated to cover. History would note, Mr. Speaker, that pre-amalgamation, Halifax did have its own charter, Dartmouth its own charter in surrounding areas. It's time to go back to that in their request. But what HRM is looking for, Mr. Speaker, is not entirely what this bill has been presented in that form. They were looking for a template, a copy of sorts of the current MGA. They were not looking for extras, Mr. Speaker. They were not looking for substantive changes. That has been clarified in ongoing meetings that we have had with staff, with elected officials, with mayor, and we will continue to have these discussions prior to the vote coming forward in this legislature, as I assume it might very well do. That's not what's been presented in this bill, Mr. Speaker, and we will be paying close attention to some significant issues that have been brought to our attention, that we recognized back in the spring when it was first put forward, that frankly the municipality was shocked to hear and see in this legislation. They had not been consulted on some significant issues. One of particular issue was the community council, the increasing of elected representatives. That was not what they were asking for. That was a shock and surprise to them. And they, in fact, we have information that we'll suggest, and no doubt we'll hear about this in law amendments as we are prepared to move forward with that, that they want that removed. It's something that, of course, we have a new council, we have a new body of representatives that need the time to discuss these issues. But we all know that there have been suggestions over time. Sometimes they're given some opportunity for debate in council, and sometimes they're not. But around potentially the need for some downsizing in that regard. So to have legislation that would suddenly thrust upon them an increase in this type of representation, an increase of fiscal challenges, more money to be spent on more representatives to do a job that, quite frankly, the current council has the ability to do, are doing a good job. This is about efficiency. This is not about fixing something that was broken. This is efficiency. No consultation is a concern for me in this one, Mr. Speaker. At a time when this government, certainly in the spring, and although not recently, we would have to acknowledge, it's often brought in this chamber that the municipality is, that the province, the government is willing to work with the municipalities, listen intently to what they have to bring to the table, look at their recommendations strongly, support UNSM, even go so far as create a memorandum of understanding that acknowledges and respects jurisdictions and powers, yet at a time when a municipality is asking for a fairly simple solution to efficiency, it gets complicated. And the consultation in that regard was ignored. Again, Mr. Speaker, we have had many conversations, many discussions, many meetings, our caucus, with stakeholders. There have been, the municipality has also raised the issue regarding application processing. We are bringing in, or we'd like to bring in, a legislation, and they would like a legislation that would help with efficiency. Yet, what they were looking for was 60 days timeline regarding application processing, and it came back very differently than that. Shortened period of time. A time frame in this legislation, Mr. Speaker, that's been suggested that will be almost impossible for the municipality to actually achieve. They're almost being set up for failure, Mr. Speaker, and that is no way for us to help them, no way to treat that level of government, to set them up for failure. Certainly, Mr. Speaker, UNSM has clearly indicated their support for a charter for Halifax Region, but a charter, no doubt, a charter that's going to actually work for them, not cause them challenges. We've heard as well from other stakeholder groups, Heritage Group, Chamber of Commerce. I look forward to an opportunity in law amendments, Mr. Speaker, that will offer time for these stakeholder groups, residents, mayor, council, CAO, staff, to come in and share with us once again what the needs are for this municipal charter. Caucus, Mr. Speaker, caucus is prepared to go forward to law amendments, but we would suggest that we would like to see some changes. Amendments are forthcoming in my thoughts as well at this point, but we will wait. The democratic process, the real spirit of consultation, Mr. Speaker, is to hear what has to be put forward for our consideration. That's what our law amendments will offer, and I look forward to that today. So on that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat, and I look forward to hearing what some of the other members have to offer in this regard. Look forward to hearing from the stakeholders, and look forward to seeing this go through. It was disappointing from our respect, disappointing certainly from the municipality, that this was adjourned back in the spring. There clearly was no need for it, and it's good to have it here. Thank you.
The Honourable, the member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise today to speak on Bill 179, which is the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter. Certainly, we also in the Liberal caucus felt that this bill should have been brought forward for discussion in the spring session because it is very important to the municipality and certainly is tied to a number of other bills, including HRM by design, which would clarify the development issues in downtown Halifax and particularly in our capital district. So that this is a bill that certainly is important, needs to be discussed, and we hope will be move through the system with amendments, we hope, as it goes forward. In looking at the purpose of the charter, there's no question that this is something that will be a benefit to the municipality. And let's put it into context, Mr. Speaker. HRM is more than 40% of the population of this province and also accounts for about 50% of our economic activity. And so it's very important to every person in Nova Scotia to look after the health and vitality of the capital city in this region of HRM, because this is really where our prosperity helps to fund other parts of the province, providing jobs, providing impetus to improve the economy right through the municipality and across the province. Our port is important to the entire province, and the goods and services that we have centered here are a draw for people not only from around Nova Scotia but also around the world, and that's very important to us to maintain that vitality. So helping HRM's council to be more responsive and to be able to frame their issues specifically in terms of what we need here to support the economy and the people that live in HRM is really important. And Mr. Speaker, in the early part of well, I guess it would be 8 years ago, I was elected to HRM Council and certainly felt even within the council that there are a lot of issues because of the breadth of this municipality, because it covers so many rural fishing villages, agricultural land, as well as the urban core. And so they really have got to have more control over the kind of powers that they have. So if we look at the Act, in fact, the powers are laid out that they really want to provide for more efficiency, better government, being able to provide the services and facilities that would improve the municipality. And one of the issues we've seen over the years is that when HRM has a pressing need or their public are demanding certain changes, things get bogged down in going forward because they would require that all of the municipalities in the province, all 55, would agree with changes that are needed here or required or asked for here in HRM. And Mr. Speaker, that does cause difficulty and slows things down. And I know that my colleague just speaking was talking about the efficiency of government. And this is very frustrating to people in HRM if they have issues that they would like to see advanced. And probably one that comes to mind right away might have been about 10 years ago when we were looking for the right to control the use of pesticides within HRM. And actually in that issue we're leaders in the country in asking to do that. And we were slowed down because of the need to get the approval to do it provincially and having to somehow clarify that we didn't want to take away anything from the rights of the other municipalities if they weren't interested at that time. I might add, Mr. Speaker, I think there's been a big change of heart rate across the province on that pesticide issue in the meantime, and that a lot has happened in the last 10 years. But at that point in time, it was an issue that you could point to say, here's something that the people in HRM who live in subdivisions and in neighborhoods where people are close to each other and where the environmental impact of pesticides was perhaps more noticeable, and they wanted to make a change which was hampered by the current structure that we have, where HRM has only a section of the Municipal Government Act sort of specifically related to their issues. This charter would allow all of the municipal government acts, rules and regulations, everything that governs other municipalities to be copied specifically for HRM, and then if there was any change to be made, we could just amend the HRM charter rather than trying to get full cooperation or understanding with all of the municipal units. So that's very important, I think, in terms of allowing the municipality to maximize the opportunity to help HRM residents. It's important to note as well that the Chamber of Commerce in Halifax has supported the intent of the bill as well. They think it's a good move forward, and I think they've sent that comment to all members of the legislature. So I had reviewed that just today. But certainly there is one clause, and the minister is well aware of it, Mr. Speaker, one clause that was not consulted or not really brought forth because of any consultation with HRM. And the council that had proposed this, we do have some new members of the council now, but they were very supportive of having their own charter. But they were essentially caught off guard, and the bill itself was sidetracked because of the introduction of a clause that calls for the giving HRM at least the power to set up district councils. And these district councils, Mr. Speaker, would allow for a further level of elected representation. And I realize that each of our districts in HRM are large. The district that I represented when I was there has since been cut into 2 separate districts because of the growth and the increase in population in what was District 16. It is now represented by District 10 and District 16. It was so big. But we certainly, individual councillors represent a large number of people, and they do already have quite a broad spectrum of interests. But to create a third level, because this would be in addition to community councils, it's really creating a third, more local level of representation, I think would create a tremendous hardship within the municipality. When we're talking about trying to be more responsive, more agile in terms of making changes, there's a lot of opportunity for input through community councils in the current structure. And just for those that are not aware of how HRM operates, there are a number of community councils. I should know the exact, but certainly one represents all of Dartmouth. There is one that represents Mainland South and Mainland North with 5 councillors. That's Chebucto Community Council, the one that I sat on. The Bedford area has 3 councillors representing Sackville and Bedford on their community council. So it is a fairly small area already that would be represented. It's already divided the large HRM council into much more manageable areas that have some community of interest, some overlap of interest that they can speak from the same song sheet, basically, for the councillors that come together there and take an interest in each other's issues. And through the community councils, there's also the opportunity for development to be controlled, and the development issues and development approvals other than the capital district are all dealt with at the community council level. But there is not spending power at the community council level. And this is where we'll run into difficulty if we were to allow a district council and another elected body to sit. We'd be adding cost to the municipality to maintain those councils, to staff and support them, because all city meetings are staffed by, they often have a lawyer present if there's an issue requiring the solicitor. They may also, in fact, always have a clerk present to take the minutes and record and take care of any communications. So it's going to add another level of administrative support that's required, additional costs, more meetings, and I think, in fact, would fatigue, to some degree, would fatigue the communities, because it's just more confusion in terms of where you have to go to have your issues heard. Right now, as I say, I think that there's an ample opportunity for any councillor who wanted to set up some sort of advisory board to ask people to help and advise them on issues. We do have some districts that have planning advisory councils to help on planning issues. But if we start to have a district council, it would be no time at all before that council would want some spending authority. And that's another big concern, Mr. Speaker. Ideally, the pressure to start a district council and have more local representation has grown out of frustration around some of the spending decisions within HRM, and maybe certain districts feeling that they don't have enough of a voice or not enough of the infrastructure and spending is coming back to their communities. So that wouldn't take very long for that to surface as a key issue as the councils proceed, if they were allowed to be formed. So we have some real difficulty with the creation of district councils. The Liberal caucus agrees with the Chamber of Commerce that it is not the right way to go. And I think really the government made a fairly significant error in slipping that individual clause into it, because they took a bill that had some consultation, was coming forward because of support from HRM, in fact being driven by HRM's council, the request coming forward to do this, and then by introducing this one clause, it has really sidetracked the intent of the bill and support for that bill. So I think there may be a lesson in here again around consultation and sort of taking the time to ensure that people at all levels, all of the stakeholders, and in this case the big stakeholder is HRM Council, be fully informed of what's coming forward, because any goodwill that's built up is lost pretty quickly when you slide something into a bill that's this big. Mr. Speaker, the bill is several inches thick. It's a very heavy document because it has every clause that is in the Municipal Government Act repeated again in the HRM Charter. So it's something that you need goodwill and understanding to ensure that what is asked for is what is presented. If it's been negotiated and agreed upon, that's what should have been brought before this council. And we really do feel that the government allowed the bill to be sidetracked in the spring, which it should not have done. We would like to be supporting this bill, and we do feel that there has to be an amendment as we go forward to look at that district council, because it doesn't have the support of the sponsor, essentially, the sponsoring stakeholder, HRM Council. That's one of our big concerns with that bill at the moment, without a doubt. I think allowing the council, again, though, the opportunity to clarify their powers, to improve their administrative function, to give them the power to bring forward amendments to their own governance act without having to spend a long time convincing other municipalities that this is the right way to go makes an awful lot of sense as we're going forward. We certainly support that idea. Again, the consultation that was done is really important, and the government needs to be cognizant of that. We've seen a number of other bills in the last session, particularly in the spring, where there was next to no or no consultation done. And it's not good enough to just notify stakeholders a day or two before a bill is going to be introduced here in the legislature. We don't consider that consultation. We think there has to be some genuine discussion and dialogue. And an excellent example of that is the Fair Access to Regulated Professions bill, which was brought in the spring. And I know that was brought in with the best intentions for labor mobility, for credential recognition for immigrants. And in fact, it had the same title, I think almost virtually the same title as a private member's bill I had brought in, which was specifically aimed at credential recognition for immigrants. And I think it's very important. But when that same bill was brought in Ontario, it had followed about a year's serious consultation with all of the regulated bodies. The Ontario bill covered 35 professions, and there was no opposition whatsoever when Ontario introduced their credential recognition bill, or their bill to make more clarity around the processes in each and every regulated profession. Because there was consultation, Mr. Speaker, there was no trouble. But here in Nova Scotia, the outcry was not from the opposition benches, it was from the regulated professions and trades, because they didn't have any idea how this was going to impact them, what costs were going to be involved, or how they were going to manage it. So it's really important, and I can't stress enough the importance of making sure there's genuine consultation before we go forward in any of these bills. Mr. Speaker, certainly HRM has made up of a number of previous municipalities, and there were charters in the past to outline the powers of each of those municipalities. And so in introducing an HRM charter, in many ways we are going back to that point. Other cities right now, like Toronto and Winnipeg and Vancouver, also have their own charters. And so I do think it's time that Nova Scotia, add that level of sophistication, recognize the importance of HRM, both economically, culturally, as a tourist destination, as the economic hub of the province. It recognizes the importance of Halifax as a center for almost half of the people who live in our province. And I think that having their own bill to guide their future is very important. So I would ask that we listen at law amendments, understanding that this will have an impact on other groups, and I certainly look forward to hearing what people say at law amendments. And we will then look further to see what amendments might be necessary. And with that, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Chair will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in the House to speak during second reading and debate on Bill number 175, the Halifax Regional Municipal Charter. Members will remember that when the bill was introduced during the spring session of the legislature, the minister informed them that this charter legislation has been specifically requested by HRM. It's legislation that will enable municipal council to respond to HRM's challenges and opportunities in a more timely and flexible way. It's intended to enable HRM to function more effectively and efficiently. It also demonstrates greater support for a strong, healthy capital by providing tools to assist HRM to grow and to prosper. Mr. Speaker, over 40% of the province's total population resides within HRM, and by all intentions, this number continues to grow. This population growth does not come without its own set of challenges, especially the importance of having an economy that can respond to this growth in an adaptable and timely and time-sensitive way, Mr. Speaker. And I think we can all agree, Mr. Speaker, this has never been so important. As last night's debate demonstrated, the slowing economy is a concern that all members and all parties share. Mr. Speaker, as a major city for the province and for the Atlantic Canada region, Nova Scotia in general expects more from HRM, including economic leadership. People come to the city to find work, to build a career, to be successful. They expect to find jobs and have infrastructure in place to respond to the challenging needs of their families, business, and workplace. And Mr. Speaker, as the province's capital, HRM's economic growth and development also affects municipalities province-wide. It is the economic engine of the province, and its performance is linked in many ways to the health and economic performance of municipalities across the province. There is no doubt that a strong economy in HRM will be a key factor in maintaining a strong provincial economy. Mr. Speaker, in these economic times, we should be looking at ways to ensure that our capital has the tools it needs to be successful. The Charter is an important piece of this. The fact is, it will help HRM move quickly to address economic shifts and take full advantage of opportunities as they arise, both now and as the Charter continues to evolve. Mr. Speaker, a major city having its own charter is not uncommon. Cities such as Vancouver, Toronto, and Winnipeg all have their own charters, and Nova Scotia is the last province to urbanize. What these cities have in common is that they are all regional centres with a strong economic base, a base that helps other regions and municipalities grow as well. So it makes sense, Mr. Speaker, for Halifax, as the province's largest city, its economic engine, and its capital, to have its own charter legislation. It makes sense for HRM to be on the same footing as other large regional centres, especially in a global market where cities and indeed countries are all competing to attract and keep development, to expand their economy, and to create employment. The Charter is based on the Municipal Government Act, or MGA, which is the legislation under which all municipalities currently operate. Currently, HRM has its own special part of the MGA that recognizes its special needs, something that no other municipality has. Of course, the part of the MGA specific to Halifax will be incorporated into the Charter. However, the needs of HRM have grown to the point that this is no longer the best governance approach. In fact, of late, HRM has been making most of the requests for legislative changes to the Municipal Government Act. Some of these requests do benefit all municipalities in the province, and others apply only to Halifax. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, the Charter will allow government to be more flexible and respond to HRM's ever-expanding needs, especially around growth, development, and economic opportunities. The Charter takes its powers relating to municipalities in general and HRM in particular that are currently under the Municipal Government Act and, with some modifications, places them into a separate and new act. For example, it includes changing the requirements for ministerial approval for long-term borrowing commitments from $100,000 to $500,000. This more accurately reflects HRM's financial realities and capabilities to assume larger amounts of borrowing. After all, HRM has a budget in the range of nearly $500 million. This legislation also provides for consultation before future amendments are introduced or requested by HRM to allow for proper research and reflection on the impact of proposed changes to the Charter. Mr. Speaker, we intend to work with HRM on a process to ensure that we continue to discuss legislation issues on a regular basis. Mr. Speaker, the Charter also provides for the appointment of an HRM Auditor General by April 1, 2009. This will help ensure accountability and transparency for residents of HRM. The Office of the Municipal Auditor General will also assist council and staff in carrying out their duties. This will be accomplished by having the auditor review operations from an independent viewpoint, something that all governments find to be most helpful. They will operate like the Provincial Auditor General and report to Halifax Council. As the Charter progresses, discussions will continue with the UNSM and will incorporate appropriate aspects of the Charter into the MGA for the benefit of all of the province's communities. I'd like to note that at the appropriate time, government will request a few amendments to the Charter legislation from when it was first introduced last session. First, Mr. Speaker, while we recognize the value of providing citizens the opportunity to be more involved in the discussions and decisions that affect their communities, we will request that provisions related to district councils be removed. However, we do intend to discuss with HRM how this might be accomplished through different means. Mr. Speaker, we will also be amending the Charter to reflect the current MGA where appropriate. As you may recall, Mr. Speaker, the MGA was brought forward in the House during the last session. The legislation includes incorporating many of the changes made to it during the spring session at law amendments. These amendments included adding sections related to planning appeals to the Utility and Review Board to align with the MGA. This will result in a uniform appeal process across the province. Government will also present an amendment to sections related to the municipal bylaw authority concerning dogs, once again to bring the Charter in line with the current wording within the MGA. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that government has support for this legislation. The HRM Charter is the direct result of a request from that municipality. It has received broad support across the province. In fact, the President of the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, on behalf of the UNSM Board, put in writing support for the enactment of the Halifax Regional Municipal Charter. And, Mr. Speaker, last month the UNSM, as a whole, passed a resolution supporting the enactment of the HRM Charter. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, representing this city's business community and its commercial interests, wrote the Minister just this week, giving their full support to the concept of a charter for HRM as it is now proposed. Mr. Speaker, the province is committed to making sure that its municipalities have the necessary tools in place to meet the changing needs of their citizens. We look forward to continuing to support our municipal partners as we all work together to keep our province strong, healthy, and vibrant for years to come. On a related note, I fully realize that there has been much discussion lately around development in downtown Halifax. Mr. Speaker, although this charter certainly provides some tools related to this topic, I would remind members that there is another bill, HRM by Design, that was also introduced last spring that specifically addresses many of the aspects of downtown development. And as we all realize, development is essential to a healthy HRM. The HRM by Design legislation will provide the municipalities with more planning tools. This bill will be called later, and we look forward to the debate at that time. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that this charter is the foundation that will allow HRM to grow and to continue to meet the challenges and seize the opportunities now and as well into the future. The young people of this province have access to some of the best education institutions in our country. and I am proud to see that they, as they enter the workforce, highly skilled and ready to apply their knowledge in a marketplace that offers a world of possibilities. It's our job, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that they have the best opportunities right here at home. Far too often, Mr. Speaker, we see our young people moving away from their families because of the opportunities out west. The majority of the time when students finish school or training, they are looking to start a career. They want to settle and to put down roots. If we want them to stay here in Nova Scotia, then it's up to us to make sure we have an economic environment that can adapt and can grow. Mr. Speaker, this charter will help HRM ensure it has the right tools as the provincial capital. It will make sure it has the right tools as the main economic driver in our province. And it will make sure HRM can meet these needs and provide these valuable opportunities to benefit our young people now and for generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Halifax, Chebucto.
Well, about an hour ago, Mr. Speaker, I raised a point of order in which I pointed out that the Honourable Minister proposing to speak a second time on second reading on his Bill 179 would have been in violation of the rules of the House. It seems to me that what we've seen is probably the minister adroitly passing his speech on to his companion minister, and I'm interested to have heard what I assume would have been the remarks of the Minister of Municipal Affairs, because they stand in some contrast to the speech that he gave at second reading on the 27th of May. That speech was a highly amusing but not all that informative speech at the time. It was, I think, it can only be characterized as a piece of free association on the part of the minister. We heard about his time as a hard rock miner, which was interesting but not actually all that germane to the bill. We heard about how at one point he had worked in Halifax and had to pay a poll tax, which was kind of interesting but not actually all that germane to the bill. And we actually heard interesting pieces of what I have to characterize as misinformation, and I'm sorry to have to point a couple of these out, but I think it's important that we set the record straight. I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if you recall, as I do, the comment that the minister made about the founding of Halifax in 1749. He in his free-ranging, very free-ranging comments was moved to remind us that the city was founded in 1749, and there was one of those interjections which Hansard recorded that sometimes comes from an anonymous honourable member. And in this case, the question from an honourable member was, by whom? And the minister responded, and I quote, by whom? By Lord Halifax, absolutely. Now, I wonder if the minister has actually had the chance to reconsider this point. Lord Halifax, his real name was George Montague Dunk, in fact, didn't found Halifax, although, in fact, I don't think he actually ever set foot here, but he did stay in London and was the minister of the Crown who was responsible for colonial affairs at the time, and certainly the city was named for him, but it was, of course, Edward Cornwallis who was the actual person on the ground and the founder of the city of Halifax. So I fear for those young students who undoubtedly in their civics class follow Hansard in detail and perhaps might have read the minister's speech from May of this year and been led slightly astray for their history or civics. And I felt that I hope that they get the chance to follow up on this and set themselves straight. But entirely apart from that, and I think there's another small matter of interest that also jumped off the page at me, and when I thought again about the minister's speech at the time, he commented as part of what I have to say is the government's futile attempt to make people in Halifax believe that they know anything about HRM or care about HRM. It was when he was talking about our universities. Halifax, of course, is blessed, as is the whole province, by many fine universities. And the minister, again, in his very free-ranging remarks, was moved to say say good things about the universities in Halifax. But here's another thing that the minister was moved to say. He said, and I quote, "This particular piece of legislation is going to make it easier to attract more students for the growth of universities and all these things," end of quote. So the minister seemed to think that having a charter for HRM is going to attract more students to the universities in Halifax. Well, I can just see a couple, George and Martha in Saskatchewan, saying to themselves, where shall we send our Betsy to university? Oh, look, HRM has a charter. That's obviously the place we'll send our daughter to university, because a city that has a charter undoubtedly has good universities. Well, you know, I have to say, I was completely puzzled and, to a certain extent, amused by the comments. It's not that we don't have wonderful universities, we do, but the existence of a charter, I think, was going to do relatively little to attract young Betsy and other potential students to our wonderful universities and our wonderful city. Mr. Speaker, you will know that in our party we have no serious objection to the idea of having a separate charter for HRM. Now, this is a matter, to a certain extent, of fashion. It might have a certain logic, but I don't know that the government has actually made the case particularly strongly. We do know that pre-amalgamation, prior to 1996, and the forced amalgamation of the four municipal entities that pre-existed HRM, they all had separate pieces of legislation that called them into an existence, and it was only at the time of amalgamation that there was one bill that created HRM, and it had its own separate legislation at the time, followed by the Municipal Government Act, which essentially in 1998 set up a framework for all the municipalities around the province. Well, if we want to go back to the pre-amalgamation state of affairs, when there's a separate piece of legislation that governs our capital, our largest entity, that's fine. City of Vancouver has it, as the minister correctly pointed out. Winnipeg has it. Toronto has it. There's no reason why we couldn't do that, but it's not exactly momentous, and it doesn't exactly accomplish a huge amount. The question really is whether the force of that legislation, whether the thrust of that legislation is to give something different to those that capital area that other municipalities might not have. And that's where the important question is, because otherwise there's some small administrative convenience, which is, as I said, essentially a small gain perhaps, but more a matter of fashion than anything else. Before I proceed with an analysis of some of the points, I might point out something of a drafting anomaly in this statute, or proposed statute, Bill 179, that's in front of us. We've been told a number of times that essentially what the bill does is it takes all the existing powers that HRM has under the Municipal Government Act and essentially repeats that legislation, but in a separate statute available for HRM only. So there are repeats of the purposes, there are repeats of the process, repeats of the powers of council, repeats of the financial aspects, repeats of the kinds of items for which the municipality may spend money, and all of these essentially photostat and repeat word for word what is in the Municipal Government Act that covers the whole of the rest of the province. But for some reason, and I have to say unimaginable reason, in a bill that is, I think, 120 pages long and several hundred clauses long, there are 4 points at which either the drafter got tired or something peculiar is going on, because at that point, in 4 of the parts, Part 5, Part 16, Part 17, Part 18, all we're told is, well, the powers for HRM are the same as the powers in the Municipal Government Act. Go look at the Municipal Government Act. And this is true for Part 5, which has to do with deed transfer tax. It says, go look in the Municipal Government Act. In Part 16 on boundaries, go look in the Municipal Government Act. In Part 17 for relations with the Department of Municipal Affairs, go look in the Municipal Government Act, it says. And for Part 18, which has to do with FOIPOP matters, freedom of information and protection of privacy, go look in the FOIPOP Act. Well, you know, or in this case, sorry, go look in the Municipal Government Act, Part 20. Well, you know, this is very peculiar. I mean, I have to say, I understand that it lengthens the bill, of course, would lengthen the bill to include a repetition, but we're already up to 120 pages, so why is it we didn't have the extra 10? Or, by the force of the same logic, if we're going to just repeat the sections from the Municipal Government Act, why did we do it with all the other sections that are there in the first place? It's a peculiarity. I mean, I called it a drafting peculiarity, but I'm at a loss to understand exactly what the thinking of the minister's department was. And perhaps he can explain it. I have yet to hear him explain this. It would be a very useful instruction to us, so that we could understand what exactly they had in mind when they were doing this. Now, I think that this is. I find it puzzling. Perhaps there's an explanation somewhere, a technical legal explanation, or some other point that might drive us to concur with what it is that the minister has done. But at the moment, I think all we can do is be puzzled. But I want to turn to what I think is perhaps the main point here. The minister has come to us and said, we are really doing something for HRM. They asked for a charter, we're responding to their concerns, and we're doing something to help them along. Now, I don't think anything is really being done to help HRM along by this separate charter. There were, we recall, 3 bills that came forward from the government in the spring having to do with planning matters, and particularly having to do with HRM. 2 of them are very focused on HRM. One of them is this bill 179. The other is 181, the HRM by design, which we have yet to debate in this House because the government chose not to call it forward and allow it to go forward for debate in the spring session. The third, of course, was Bill 138, which made some general changes to the Municipal Government Act. But if the government were really seriously concerned about doing something for the residents of the area of the province that they keep telling us, both in the spring and in the speech that we heard today, contains at least 40% of the population of Metro, then maybe they might want to add the 2 more seats in the legislature that the population of Metro deserve to have on an appropriate reapportionment of seats. That would do something for the residents of Metro. As the government keeps pointing out, there is a migration of population to the Metro area. And if there were appropriate representation for this area, there would probably be 2 more seats in the legislature that would be assigned to the voters who live here. The voters who live here are probably more interested in having fair, proportional representation in the legislature than they are in having their own charter. So if the government really wants to do something for the Metro area, they might think about that. Well, I don't see the government moving on that. They certainly didn't do it when after the time of the last census, the last federal census, which triggers our reconsideration of where seats ought to be. They certainly didn't come forward with such a proposal. They weren't interested in that. Well, there are other things that the government might have done that would probably help HRM as an entity. Even HRM, if you think about what the municipal government itself, and not the general population, is interested in doing, there's an interesting possibility when it comes to greater powers for the municipalities in the area of establishing their own electrical utilities and the ability to wheel that electricity. That's something HRM Council is interested in. But there's nothing in this bill that does anything particular to advance that. And that would be a benefit to many of the people who live here in HRM. It would be an environmental benefit. It would probably be an economic benefit. It would be many things, but the government isn't moving on that. That's not included in this bill. If the government is so interested in doing something for the people in HRM, that's something that they might have done, but it's not there. Essentially, what they said they did was, with a few minor changes, they photostated the existing Municipal Government Act, and they packaged it again as Bill 179, and they brought it forward and called it the HRM Charter. Well, you know, there's a big difference between doing something that's effective for the people of Metro and pretending that you have a knowledge and concern for the people of Metro, and that's what's missing. Here's another suggestion. The government frequently says that it's interested in sustainability matters. In the purpose section of this bill, they could have included statements about the purpose of municipal government being to pay strict attention to matters of sustainability. Other provinces have that. And they have it not just for their capital cities, they have it for all their municipalities. It's part of the purpose of the Municipal Government Act in other provinces, in which they say, we want our municipalities to pay attention to sustainability matters, and it's stated there in the purpose section right at the beginning of the Act. Not here. It's not in Nova Scotia. It's not in Nova Scotia for any of the municipalities. Could have started off with HRM, which has expressed a strong interest. Voters here have expressed a strong interest in promoting sustainability. These things should have been in this Act, or the government should have taken steps to move on them separately. Let me tell you something else that should have been in this Act when the minister sat down to think about what else they could do for the development process. The minister is very focused, and I've heard him frequently comment in rather negative terms about the process of development in central Halifax. Frequently, such proposals go forward by a device known as development agreements. Development agreements are special planning instruments that are provided for in the Municipal Government Act and were provided for in its predecessor, the Planning Act. They allow owners of property to enter into what is essentially a kind of contractual agreement with the municipality that steps outside the normal restrictions of the zoning that would obtain otherwise. Something that seems to be somewhat missing from the development agreement provisions in the Municipal Government Act as it stands is a push to require the municipality to bargain hard for public benefits. That is something which, although I think it's implied in the statute as it stands now, is not explicit. It should be explicit. It could have been made explicit in this legislation, but it was not. So for a minister who regularly, along with his premier, says that he's so concerned about development issues in the capital area, they missed an opportunity. They sound very one-sided when they're talking about this. When they talk about developments, they say, oh, the owners of the property really want to move ahead. But there have to be public benefits that go along, quite explicit public benefits that go along with extraordinary developments, and that's been missing. Anyone who knows the history of development and particular development projects in HRM and on the Dartmouth side of the water, I have to say as well, will realize that development agreements have not been pursued in that way by the municipality, although they should have been, and the government could have forced them to do that now. They could have made this explicit. Well, that should have been in this bill, but it's not. The government is not thinking about the development process in any informed way. Well, what are other things that could have been in this bill as well? There are problems with non-conforming use clauses in the bill at the moment, in the legislation as it exists at the moment, and also with respect to minor variances. These are two other land use planning tools that are important tools that exist in the Municipal Government Act that are frequently used by owners of land to make adjustments, and again go beyond the normal kinds of restrictive rules that apply to most landowners. Now, I'm not saying they're illegitimate. They should be there. There should be provisions, of course, for non-conforming uses, and there should be provisions for minor variances. The trouble is that there have been a lot of problems that have come forward, and some of them have been litigated in the courts, and the minister should be aware of them. And this was an opportunity, at least with respect to HRM, where a lot of these fights are played out, to change the rules somewhat, to think about how those rules might have been changed, and changed for the better. So I hope that when the minister thinks about changes that might be made to this legislation, he turns his mind to some of these points. I would also like to suggest that when the government comes forward with a very lengthy bill, that they ought to include an index, and they should probably also include a specific analysis of all component parts that differ from the original bill. That is really something that should have been tabled here along with the legislation. It would help enormously, I think, all members of this House, including members on the government side, to understand exactly what it is that might be different in this bill. So it's one thing when a bill comes forward and it's 2 pages or 1 page or 5 pages, and it represents clear amendments to existing pieces of legislation. But where the government comes and says, we're just repeating what exists in a pre-existing piece of legislation, and there are a few changes tucked in, it doesn't help if the government fails to produce a list that is explicit as to exactly what the changes are. So I think that the minister can still do that. It's not too late. It would help people enormously. Now I want to turn to the comments that were made by the last speaker for the government, in which he suggested that there are a number of amendments that are going to come forward with respect to this bill. Again, I want to suggest that the government should be explicit about what those amendments are today. They should list them today. They should give out drafts of what those proposed amendments are today. The reason they should do that now is that, of course, our process involves a law amendments committee which hears from the public. If major amendments are going to be made to this bill at the Law Amendments Committee stage, how is it that the public is going to be able to comment on those and understand what it is that is going to come forward? They'll be commenting on the bill as it was introduced. They'll be commenting on the bill in light of some very abstract observations from the Minister of Health Promotion about what kinds of amendments might be introduced by the government. But the public will not be in a position to speak with respect to the details of what those amendments are unless they are in a position to be able to see them and read them in advance of their appearance before law amendments. That is not a desirable way.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, in reference to the amendments the honourable member is speaking of, I'm attempting to get them drafted and be available for circulation on Monday. I will tell the honourable member that a couple of them, one deals with removing the reference to the Community Council, which was a bit of a sticky one, and and a couple. And Mr. Speaker, with regard to these things, I know that the honourable member, his caucus was met with the HRM people, and they were requested some amendments, and those are the ones, Mr. Speaker. There's no secret about them. He's just trying to mystify something that he knows is no mystery.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax-Buckdale.
What I'm mystified by, Mr. Speaker, is whether that was a question or a point of order or anything else that might fit into the rules. It doesn't seem to fit anywhere, but I'm happy to hear from the minister that he plans to table some texts that the public can study, and I hope he does it within good time. I hope he does it well before the public gets to make its comments at law amendments. Well, I think the concern about the Halifax Charter is not that there is a proposal for a Halifax Charter. As was said by my colleague, the member for Eastern Passage, and also by myself, we'll certainly support this bill through second reading in order to look at it on a clause-by-clause basis at the Law Amendments Committee and perhaps at third reading. The issue is really whether there are any provisions here that are problematic. Now, the one of district councils that the minister just referred to is clearly an item that is highly problematic. And as the minister correctly just said in his uncategorizable interjection, the question of district councils is one that the government itself invented out of thin air, and much to the consternation of many members of the public. And I have to say that not only did HRM Council never ask for those district councils, but many members of the public, when they thought about them, realized that not only would there be awkwardness and expense involved, they worried that some community council may choose to move down to the district council level some of the powers delegated to it by the full council. This would not be an appropriate way to go, and I have to say that if the minister's intention is to back off entirely from district councils, this would be a very good thing, and indeed shows the value of the comments made by the opposition and by the public faced with something that was tucked into this bill, which was supposed to simply be a repetition of what was already in the Municipal Government Act. Let me draw the minister's attention to another set of potential problems, and that has to do with overlap in this bill with some of the proposals from that are yet to come in Bill 181. Bill 181 has been introduced, but they have yet to be debated. Many of the proposals, or some of the proposals from Bill 181 appear to be included within the HRM Charter at the moment. If that's not the case, then I'd appreciate hearing from the minister about that. But I'm concerned that there are provisions about site planning which are a bit beyond what's already in the Municipal Government Act, although I want to check that by doing line-by-line analysis. But if it turns out that in Bill 179 there are provisions that are ones that are in